All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the NIH Director's New Innovator Award webinar. We're glad to have you with us. Just please remember that, please submit your questions in the Q&A box for WebEx. So we try not to use the chat for questions unless you're having technical difficulties or have some type of logistics question, then go ahead and use the chat if you need assistance. But if you have questions about the New Innovator Award, please submit them in the Q&A box. It just helps us keep things more orderly that way. And just as a reminder, if you have really specific scientific questions or specific inquiries that are very tailored to you or might be private, we ask you to not include it here, but we are happy to discuss that with you offline. Just a reminder again, submit questions in the Q&A box, use the chat box for technical issues. And once again, please save your scientific or situationally specific questions for an email to us. You can email us at newinnovatorawards@mail.nih.gov. We are recording this webinar and we will be posting it on our website. So the recording and the slides will be posted at commonfund.nih.gov/newinnovator. So you can go there probably a week or two after this. We should have them posted. But I do encourage you to go to our website for more guidance if you have additional questions or need additional resources. We have a lot of information there. We have frequently asked questions as well as an application and award guide, which includes example applications and a lot more details on submitting your application. So to get us started, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First off, I'm Becky Miller. I'm a program leader in the Office of the Director. And we also have Trish Lebowski, who's from the Office of the Director as well, and is the program leader for the High Risk, High Reward Research Program and oversees the New Innovator Award Initiative. We also have our colleagues from the Center for Scientific Review. We have Jean Carstilla, Jean's here, who is the Scientific Review Officer, and also Stefania Senger, who's another Scientific Review Officer, and Sharon Eisern, another Scientific Review Officer, and Josh Powell, another Scientific Review Officer. This is a big group, so we have a lot of help from our colleagues. So thank you to them for attending. So I'm going to turn this over to Trish to go ahead and get us started.
Thanks, Becky. Hey, good afternoon or good morning, I guess, if you're on the left coast. Thanks for coming today to hear about the Director's New Innovator Award Program. And I just first want to orient you to tell you a little bit about this part of the NIH, right? The NIH is huge. And where we are is in this smallish office called the Office of Strategic Coordination that runs the NIH Common Fund. And the NIH Common Fund is dedicated to setting up catalytic programs that are high risk, high reward in general. And this is a list of all of them. You don't have to look through them or look up all those acronyms, but it's just to give you an idea that we have a lot of programs, 27 at the moment, in 3 broad categories. And one of the reasons, next slide, is to illustrate to you that these could be resources for your research. Your own research programs, even if you don't get money from a program. These programs produce things like access to high-end instrumentation, cryo-EM, huge databases, too many to name, reagents that are unique, protocols, all kinds of things. And you get a taste of what's there just by looking at this slide, but please go to our website and dig in if you want. And if you click again, over there on the sort of bottom left, HRHR, that's where we are here today to talk about the high risk, high reward program. So in the next slide, this program has 4 different awards, and we're only going to talk about the second one today, but just briefly, the Pioneer, the New Innovator, the Transformative Research Award, and the Early Independence Award. So we're going to focus strictly here in the magnifying glass, the purple one right there. But in general, these 4 programs are designed to support scientists at all career stages that are proposing really different, bold, high-risk, high-impact research projects. On the next slide, these are all done via an annual funding opportunity. So each year we publish 4 new funding opportunities for these 4 award programs, okay? So when you apply to the New Innovator program, make sure that you write down that it's the current funding opportunity, okay? The next slide. All 4 of these are designed to support high-risk, high-impact ideas. Next slide. For all of them, we don't require any preliminary data, and we don't require or really want you to put in a detailed experimental plan. The next slide. This is important. I get so many emails. Is my topic relevant for a New Innovator application? And the answer is almost inevitably yes. We are open to absolutely any scientific area relevant to the NIH mission. That includes behavioral social sciences, biomedical, applied, formal sciences, clinical trials, basic translation, clinical research, all of that. As long as it's in the NIH mission space, yes, it is relevant for a director's award application. The next slide. We encourage everyone, anyone that is eligible, to apply. We want applications from investigators from diverse backgrounds and the full spectrum of all eligible institutions. Don't think just because my institution hasn't had one of these before that that's a bad thing. In fact, that could be a very good thing. So please, yes, apply. There's a list in the funding opportunity, or not a list, but an outline of eligible institutions, and I would be shocked if your institution's not in there. Okay, this is a working group, the high risk, high reward working group. These are all staff members at NIH, and you don't need to read this. What the point I want to make here is you see the little acronyms after everyone's names. Those indicate all the different institutes and centers at NIH. And some of them, there's more than one, our colleagues from CSR and us from the OD, but every single institute, there are 27 at NIH, is represented here. So we have individuals from all areas of science that are interested in this program, that are paying attention and that help with things. So it's important for you to know that yes, your science is welcome. On the next slide. So let's focus here on the Director's New Innovator Award. This was started quite a while ago, back in 2007, and it's the second award program that was stood up. Pioneer was first. And it's designed to support unusually creative early career investigators. You must have ESI status, and you must be proposing something bold, innovative, something that's going to be high impact research. Importantly, it's a single PI application only. You can't come in as a team. You can come in, you can have collaborations, and we'll talk about that later, how you work that in, but it is a person-centric award, single PI. So you must meet the ESI, or early stage investigator criteria. These are not specific to the DP2 New Innovator. This is a NIH-wide criteria policy, and you can Google NIH and ESI to get the policies. But in general, you have to be within 10 years of either your terminal doctoral degree or clinical training, and you cannot have already received a substantial independent NIH grant. And there's a list online of all the grants that you can receive that do not break ESI status. And that's only NIH grants. You can have grant money from foundations or NSF or DOD or anywhere else, and that's fine. I'm just talking about NIH funding. You have to be able and willing to commit 25% of your research effort. That's not your whole effort. Not your complete, if you have clinical duties or something like that, that doesn't count. We just want your research effort, 25% of that. The award, it's a flat budget. It's 1.5 million. It's dispersed in 2 segments. In year 1, you get $900,000 plus indirect costs, and then in year 4, you get the remaining $600,000 plus indirect costs. And it uses a DP2 activity code, which is a little different than many of the other R codes that you might be familiar with. The next slide. So the application is pretty straightforward, but these things are always confusing when I tell you not to use something and the people in your grants office say, well, wait a minute, where's this section? You got to listen to the instructions that are in the funding opportunity. If there's nothing specific about an area, then you follow the general directions in the SF424 application guide, which is this huge guide that you can find online. But this is it very distilled down, okay? We don't want a specific games page. Don't upload it. It won't be that, it's not going to be incorporated. We don't want it. Your essay, it goes in the research strategy section, but it's an essay, okay? It's 10 pages, not 12. And it's going to incorporate all the things that I'm going to tell you today should be in the essay, all right? Biosketch, only yours as the PI is allowed. Remember, single PI, so you might have collaborators or anything like that, it's fine. You don't put their biosketches in. All we want is yours. Bibliography, nope, no bibliography. You can certainly cite things, and you probably should, but they must fit in the 10-page limit of the essay. And yes, you can use an abbreviated way to cite them, and yes, you can make them a slightly smaller font, but don't go crazy or that'll be a problem. But they must fit within the essay. Budget, we'll go through that, but very few budget details are required. Equipment, like your equipment that you have available, nope, don't want to hear it. Letters of support, nope, not allowed. What if I have a collaboration? We'll talk about that, but you're not allowed to have a letter of support. So what about other things? I'm using mice, I'm using human subjects. Well, yes, if it's appropriate, you want to include those things. These do not drive your score, but you want to include them. Reviewers do look at them. They shouldn't influence your score, but things like authentication of reagents, vertebrate, animal information, human subjects, estimates of numbers, things like that, biohazards, yes, you should include those bits if they're relevant to the proposal. And the next slide. Now, data management sharing plan. I think I already saw a question in the Q&A box about this. Yes, you need to include it. This is a standard NIH policy for any grant. It's not specific to the DP2s. If you have questions about it, go to that bottom website, sharing.nih.gov. There's lots of information. There's examples. It should be short. This is a 2-page other plan section. That's the way you upload it in the other plans, okay? You want to include what sort of data you're going to be producing, any tools or software that you're going to be generating, standards, how you're going to preserve the data, how people can access it, all of that. So it's very standard, but you need to include it. If there are costs for that, you include it in the R&R budget form, okay? The budget for that can be considered by reviewers. If you add a whole bunch of extra money in there, they can say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And the plan will be reviewed by the program officer if an award is to be made. It's not written in stone. We can also adjust that if an award is to be made during the just-in-time process, but it does become a term and condition of the award. It's part of the legal requirements for your award if you get one. Okay, next slide. So the essay. So this is different from an R01. And, I always encourage people to have your mentors, colleagues, collaborators, read your document. And oftentimes they'll say, wait a minute, this doesn't look like an R01. And that's actually a good thing, hopefully, because it should not look like an R01. It should be different. It really is an essay. So we give you some subject headings there, and you should use them. You have to designate the project science area, and Jean will talk more about that later. The heart of it, the meat of it is going to be in this project description. And of course, yes, you can add more subtitles to break it up a little bit. But you want to talk about why this is important to do. What's the overall general approach? Remind them that because this is a DP2, you don't need to include preliminary data. You can include it, but if you include it, it's going to be judged, and, be prepared for that. You do not need to provide a detailed experimental plan. So oh, there's a typo there. Whoops, sorry guys. But you don't need to include that. And it's always good to remind the reviewer, because this is a DP2 in accordance with the funding opportunity, I'm not providing a detailed experimental plan. But the reviewers need to understand that you've thought deeply about this. You have a really good plan to move forward. You know it's risky, you've thought about the risk, and you know how to mitigate that risk. You have alternates. If something doesn't work, what are you going to do? So you have thought about it, and you have a plan, and it has to be robust. It has to be rigorous. The rigor of the research is really important. Innovation, you need to convince reviewers that what's new? Why is this innovative? What's different here? Talk about yourself. You have to talk about why you are the right person for this award. What are the qualifications? What have you done that is a track record of creativity or innovation that makes these reviewers convinced that you should be the right person to do this? Why is the project suitable for a new innovator award? Why is it not basically an R01? Why is this high risk, high reward? If one of the most heartbreaking reviews we see all the time is, this is great science, it should be an R01. So why is this not suitable for an R01? And it really just can't be because I don't have preliminary data. That's not a good reason. You have to describe why it's high risk, why the impact is going to be so high, things like that. So statement of research effort, again, you have to commit at least 25% of your research effort to the project. So you want one sentence in there that says that. And then a bibliography with references, citations. You don't have to have 5,000 references. You don't have room for that. But you should have the key ones, the critical ones. And again, they can be in any format that works. It could be just DOI numbers or something like that. It's up to you. And you can even, as I said, use a slightly smaller font, but do not shrink it so much that it can't be read, because that'll be a problem. So that has to all fit, all of that, within 10 pages, okay? And the next slide, points to consider. Okay, Jean's going to talk about the review in a minute, but I want to emphasize that the work, what you're proposing, has to be accessible to both the scientists within your scientific area, as well as people outside that are, broadly appreciative of the impact of what this project could bring if it was successful. You think about it, you might want to have a landscape description of the field, the state-of-the-art challenges, gaps, opportunities. So provide the context for why what you're going to propose is so innovative and will have such high impact. Be aware of jargon. Do not write this in a very dense R01 type way that is full of jargon. If you, for example, are a neuroscientist and you have a geneticist reviewing this grant and it's all in neuroscience jargon, there's going to be a problem. They're not going to be able to get through the jargon to get to the point that you want to make. So be careful with that. And do not write it basically in code, okay? And remember, as I said before, you don't need any preliminary data. You don't need a detailed experimental plan, but the reviewer has to know that you have a plan. You've thought really hard about this. It's not just, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, right? You have a plan, you have alternatives, you will identify the risks and talk about how you're going to get around them. And again, the research needs to be rigorous. It needs to be reproducible. You want to validate any new technology you're going to develop, perhaps, or new approach to your lab in your lab. You want to validate it, estimate how many numbers of samples you're going to need, animals or humans, some samples, whatever. Always remember, NIH policy includes sex as a biological variable if it's appropriate. The next slide, we have a lot of help on our website. So I really encourage people to go there. Hopefully you've already gone there, but if not, Common Fund, New Innovator, FAQ will get you there. There's a detailed application award guidance. There's even a few samples. Now, some of these are old, not all of them. I think there's one or two new ones, but some of them are very different. We used to give out the funds in one aliquot in year one. So the budget might look different, but you get the idea of the tone and how these should be written. Remember, they're successful sample applications, ones that did receive funding. Okay, the next slide. Okay, the budget period. As I mentioned in the past, we were giving out the funds in one giant payment year one. We can't do that anymore. HHS, Health and Human Services, has changed their policies. So now we give the funds out in two multi-year funding. That's what MYF is. Segments. So one is for the first 3 years and the second one's for the final 2 years. We're flexible about how exactly you spend the funds. I mean, it's approximately $300,000 each year, but you can do that however it needs to be done in your lab. You will be able to take extensions, no cost extensions, beyond the initial 5-year project period. And that's new. It didn't used to be the case. So that's a real benefit to awardees now. The next slide, so budget informations. You need to put these budgets, annual budgets, in the application, but we only want minimal information. We do not and won't accept a detailed budget, okay? So for the first segment, which would be, I mean, it's a guesstimate, right? September 1st, 2025 to August 31st, 2028, you cannot exceed 900,000. And the second segment, you cannot exceed 600,000. You should include indirect costs, facilities, and F&A costs in your budget. That does not count toward the 900 plus 600. So that's on top of the 900 plus 600, okay? So the next slide. Here's just a small sample. This is what you should do, okay? And this is going to be for your grants people probably, but you can give them these slides. So you select the appropriate budget types. You click on project and next. You provide the start and end dates over there. Okay, there's the example, and each one is 1 year. The next, senior or key personnel, you're only allowed to put the PI in. You're not allowed to add anybody else. That doesn't mean you can't pay them, but we don't want the details about them, okay? I know this is going to be very strange and your grants people aren't going to like it, but you enter zero for requested salary and 0 for fringe benefits. That doesn't mean that's in the circle there in the right-hand side. That doesn't mean that you won't receive salary. Of course you will. But this is just, we do not want the details at this point, okay? So you fill that out the way we tell you to fill it out. I know it seems foreign and your grants people are going to not be happy, but trust me, that's the way we want to see it, okay? On the next slide, if you want to suggest equipment. That's the one thing that you do need to justify. So you want to buy a new, I don't know, centrifuge, microscope, whatever. The reason for this is that they incur a different indirect cost rate than all the rest of the grant. So you would need to list what it was with a rough estimate, and then you can justify why you would need that piece of equipment in the budget justification. That's the only thing that we ever want to see justified. Well, that and the data management, but that's it, okay? No salary or anything. Okay, so there's the data management sharing plan. You have to include costs there, and then again, you'd have to justify that. It's section L of the budget justification, okay? Now, in section F up above, other direct costs, you can add that line item, requested direct cost. It's everything else except for equipment. So if you, let's just say it's 1.5 million and you had I'm making it up, 0.5 million in equipment, so that would be 1 million, all right? But it's per year, so you have to do that correctly, all right? So don't add the equipment on top of the 900 or 600. That comes out of it. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, one last thing there. Ensure that years 1 through 3 are only 900 and years 4 through 6 are only 600. Don't request more than that. And don't request less than that either, because less than that is not good either. Make sure that it really does equal it or comes within $1 or $2, okay? And then you add indirect cost in section H there, all right? And again, these slides will be available so you can look through them. All right, next one. Now I'm going to pass it over to Jean to talk to you about the complicated review for this program.
We're going to talk about the review here, and I will begin by saying that we have a fantastic team that we've put together at the CSR, and Dr. Sharon Asern is here, along with Dr. Stefania Sanger is here, and also on our team is Dr. Josh Powell. So when I go over this, it'll be things that we do as a team together. So let's see here. So let's go forward. Next slide, please. Okay, good. So starting off from the very basic, you have your great idea that you have in your lab, and you think about how to put it together into a cogent, focused application, and you transfer it to the NIH through grants.gov for receipt at CSR by August 17th, 2024. That's a submission deadline. When we receive it, I'll give you an overview of what we do with it, and then I'll go into a little bit more specifics as we go through it. So this is a two-stage form of review, with stage number 1 being the mail review. In other words, we go out and get experts within your topic area field. How do we understand the topic area field? As Trish mentioned before, you characterize your own research with 2 areas of science that you input in your agency routing portion of your application there. So make sure you add those areas of science in the proper space within your application there. Those 2 are set to characterize your application. So what we do is we identify reviewers that characterize themselves with the same areas of science. So when it comes down to piecing together and putting together reviewers to evaluate your application in this mail review process, we essentially just match the areas of science with your application based on areas of science and set them up as for the mail review. As you can tell, this mechanism, this award program, we're not looking to get spot-on expertise with reviewers that have hands-on expertise in your area of science. You could imagine the bind we'd be even in setting up this review. But we do get the experts that are topic experts within that area that should be able to understand what your application is about and evaluate it for impact, for innovation, as they go through. So I'll reiterate what Trish said before as well, is when you're writing up your application, please think about the audience that are going to be evaluating it. Getting too jargon rich may throw them into a loop, and being able to evaluate it clearly. So following the mail portion of the review, stage 1 of review, where preliminary scores are provided at the end of their evaluations, applications are lined up from best score on down, beginning with the best score on down, and the very top scores are moved over into the finalist position. Not all finalists have the highest scores. Probably 66%, 2/3 are moved over based on the top 3 the scores generated by the mail reviews. Following about 66%, about 2/3 of the finalists being generated by the scores, we asked the editorial board, who are a second set of reviewers, part of stage 2 reviewers. These are experts within each of the areas of science. We have representatives from each of the 9 areas of science there. So they're not going to be spot on. Some are going to be in fields that are very different from your field. But this program is set up so that applications are evident in terms of the impact that can be made to the general fields of science. So from the editorial board of reviewers, they will go through and identify the next 1/3 of the applications that will fill out the total number of finalist applications. And it's probably closer to 15 to 20% of all applications will end up in the finalist pile there. The meeting that we will have for the finalist, where the editorial board will discuss all the finalist applications, that will be sometime in March. And we'll get back with you exactly about that. So applications come in mid-August. We should have we immediately begin the mail review process, so that by December, January, we have we've identified the finalists based on the scores provided by the mail review. It goes on to the editorial board with our final meeting in March. After the final meeting in March, where applications have their final scores, it goes to the advisory council in May, and there's the selection of the awards, and there's a public announcement sometime in September. So this is a year-long process. Next slide, please. So to kind of give a little bit of specifics, let's briefly go over stage 1. Applications. Since we have this is a very popular program, we have a lot of applications that come in. We've split up the applications. We will split up the application into 2 equivalent panels. Now, what does it mean, equivalent? Equivalent means that there are ratios of each area of science that are represented within the entire panel. So we try to keep the same ratio of areas of science in each of the 2 sub-panels. In other words, it could be 25% of molecular and cellular biology. It could be 10% of immunology and infectious diseases. We'll try to keep those proportions the same in each of the 2 panels there. These panels will be reviewed out of one of our branches at the Center for Scientific Review. It just so happens that it's being reviewed out of the Respiratory, Cardiac, and Circulatory Sciences Review branch. Please don't get freaked out once you see that, knowing that your area of science is not part of the respiratory, cardiac, or circulatory science field. We get a lot of people really getting very nervous about that. That's just the locus of the evaluation within CSR. That's where we live, over there. So that's where it's going to be. That's where the home is for the review. We go through an administrative review where we check for the completeness of the application, including making certain that everybody is eligible as an early stage investigator. As Trish mentioned earlier, applications are grouped based on areas of science as identified by you, the applicant. Make certain that you log that information in the appropriate slot in your application under agency routing information. We look to see that any potential conflicts of interest will be dealt with. In other words, when we set up the review of applications, making certain that the reviewer has no ties to you as the applicant or the applicant institution. And male reviewers will be recruited to cover all representative areas of science. So, and that's the way that we pair up a reviewer with your application, is via these areas of science. Next slide, please. So with the stage 1 male reviewers, we recruit the panel of male reviewers. We match the reviewers with the science, and we add 3 reviewers to every application. The applications will be evaluated. We instruct the reviewers to use the 3 unique criteria unique to this this award mechanism to evaluate each application. The 3 unique criteria include: number 1, importance and potential impact of the scientific problem, the novelty and innovativeness of the approach, and the creative potential of the ESI. So as you're writing up your application, keep those in mind, as those are the 3 basic criteria that will be used to evaluate your application. They will rate your application based on each of those 3 criteria and put together an overall impact paragraph, looking for the significance of the work and mentioning which of those 3 or aspects of those 3 criteria that served as score drivers in their final score. Next slide, please. So for the selection of the applications, as we mentioned, selection is based on rank score order by the male reviewers for about 2/3 or so of the applications. Selection of the topic experts within the application. Selection of the topic experts will be made by the areas of science, which I mentioned several times, and the overall impact scores will be taken into consideration when determining the finalist. The second part is the unbiased selection of applications by the editorial board reviewers. It's a combination of scores and the impact statements. So if 2 of the male reviewers really loved the application and gave it exceedingly high scores, but the third one was a little bit more lukewarm, the editorial board reviewers can look at the application and make a determination themselves, and indicating that this one is worthy of being a finalist. So so it's not all simply the 3, making sure that the 3 male reviewers each were thought of your application in the highest regard. So approximately 20% of all the submitted applications will go to the stage 2. And then of course this will be in the 2 equivalent panels. Next slide, please. So for the editorial board review, after the finalists are determined, we will have 15 to 20 panelists. Again, multiply this by 2. There'll be 2 separate review meetings. There'll be senior members of the scientific community, experts with broad scientific understanding that are used to evaluating broad areas of science. Even though they have more of an area of their own interest, they're used to looking and evaluating broader areas of science. Each finalist application is assigned to 3 editors, editorial board reviewers, and these reviewers will have access to the application and to the prior critiques and evaluations. All finalist applications will be discussed. So there's not a discussion line for these finalist applications. They will all be discussed. So about 20% of the entire bolus of applications that come in will be discussed in sometime in March. The release of the final scores and the summary statements for all will be done after the meetings in March. For discussed applications, summary statements will include a final score along with the resume and summary discussion. The not discussed applications, the ones that did not make it to become the finalists, will receive the stage 1 critiques associated there. So next slide, please. So if you have any questions about the review process, you can contact us at our email there below, newinnovatorreview@mail.nih.gov. And we will do our best to respond and get the answer to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Trish and Jean, for going over that. We're now going to begin the Q&A portion of our webinar. So we ask that if you do have questions that you'd like answered, that you please put them in the Q&A box. Usually that box, if you click under More with the 3 dots, there'll be an option for a Q&A box. Click on that, and that's where we're asking you to insert your questions. We ask that you reserve the chat for if you have technical issues or need additional help in logistics and that type of thing. All right, so I've binned the questions based on topic areas. So to start us off, I'd like to answer questions about eligibility. So Trish, when you submit the DP2 application, should the applicant be completely independent?
Yes. But we don't determine whether or not you're independent. That's up to your institution. So if the institution will submit, for example, an R01 grant for you, they'll probably submit a DP2 grant for you as well. So likely if you're a postdoc, they may not agree to do that. And you have to talk to your grants folks, people in your department, to determine if you're eligible, if you're in an independent research position and eligible to submit the grant. And we believe your institution, if they submit it for you, then we believe you are eligible and that you are an independent scientist. Now, the reviewers might put their opinion in your critiques, but that's the line that we draw for eligibility. Yes, you must have ESI status still, but yeah, it doesn't matter if you're tenure track or not.
So just a specific to that, can postdocs apply?
Well, if you're going to have an independent research position by the time the award would be made, then yes. However, that gets a little tricky because oftentimes, as you know, maybe you don't, but as you should know, the NIH makes awards to institutions, not individuals, right? So if you're completing your postdoc somewhere and you have a faculty position or something that will be an independent research position lined up at another institution, you want that other institution as the second one that has to submit the grant for you. Likely your postdoc institution won't do that for you. So you'll have to talk to the people that you're working with to determine who will be eligible, who will determine your independence and allow you to submit the application. Did I say that right? Is it September 1st? I think it's by September 1st of the year of the
2025. Yep.
Yes. So yeah, so if you're not going to have an independent position until January 2026, you don't want to submit this year. You can think about it. You can think about it for next year. But if you're not going to be independent by the time the award would start, don't submit yet.
All right. And we have some questions about research effort. Can you commit more than 25% effort? Is there a
Sure.
max?
Yeah, no, there's no maximum, but you again should talk to people at your institution and you should commit what makes sense, for the budget and the amount of work.
All right. And then feeding off of that, if you have a K08 grant, can you reduce your effort on the K08 to less than 75% if you receive a DP2?
Well, that depends on your program officer for the K08, so I can't answer that. You need to talk to your K08 program officer. Sometimes they will let you reduce it in the final year of the K08, but that would be up to them.
All right, and bouncing off of that, does 25% research effort mean 3 calendar months, or is 25%, or is it 25% of my contract? Yeah.
Well, it depends on what your contract is, I guess. If your contract is such that you only have 30% research time, if that's what you mean, so you have 70% clinical or something else, then it would be 25% of the 30%. So what is that? 7.5% effort total. Now, then, you put that in there and reviewers may have I don't know, they may have an opinion about that. I don't know if it would be viewed positively or negatively, but they may voice their opinion if they are concerned that that's not enough research effort. I've seen it, I don't know about 7.5, but I've seen it where people want to put maybe 2% of their total effort because they say they only have, I don't know, 10 or 7% research effort. And sometimes that doesn't fare too well in review, but it all depends. You have to justify it to the reviewers why that's enough time.
All right. Another question. Do we have to have a change in research direction for this?
No, that's not the case. You might be thinking about criteria for the Pioneer Award program, which does require a distinct change in research direction. However, I will say that if it is an obvious next step in your research program and there's no innovative leap forward, that might not fare well in review. So if it's something that is totally predictable and not all that novel, that could be a problem. But it doesn't mean you have to change your research direction.
Okay. All right. Here's one asking about risk. So I'm often confused about risk in grant proposals. Can you provide more details about what a high risk proposal might be? And does it mean low likelihood of being achieved? You mentioned that we should identify risks and explain how we plan to get around them, so I'm unsure how to balance the idea of being high risk while at the same time providing details of how to avoid risk.
Oh, that's the perfect balance, right? And I don't think anybody can answer that for you except for what you know is possible or what is not. I mean, obviously you don't want to propose something that's impossible, but risky is okay. Risky means it's not obvious. Maybe no one's done it before, but you have a plan. And, maybe you have some preliminary data, but again, that's not required. But maybe you have the experience that you have built things, technologies, or you've, I don't know, pulled together interdisciplinary teams before to look at things in a different way. Risk does not mean impossible. I think that's sort of the difference, the line that you would draw. But at the same time, if it's obvious that it will work, and of course it's feasible and none of the technology is new or challenging, that's not risky. So I think you need to define it and talk about what you're capable of, what's feasible. And if something is risky, you just need to acknowledge it. This might not work. And if it doesn't work, this is what we'll do to either make it work or have an alternative approach to get at the answer to the question. It's a tough one.
Absolutely. Jean, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Please.
No, I think that it's, if you're doing something brand new, then you may rely more on the literature, and so you I think having a logical rationale behind it, but then indicating that this hasn't been done before, but this is my bold new plan. And if and as Trish said, if you have a fallback in terms of alternative plans, should it not work, then it's good to put that forward. And then my colleagues also, if anyone has anything to add to it.
I could add to it. I think reviewers are more likely to accept something that is high risk if it has a really high reward. If they think that their field or multiple fields are going to gain new insights, they're more willing to say, well, that's risky, but if they can get it to work, it's going to be a wonderful thing for the community.
Excellent points, both of you. Yeah.
All right, there are two questions that dovetail together, so I'm going to just kind of feed them off each other before you answer. So you keep referring to labs. Is it to be deduced that this award is mostly for basic scientists? And then the other one is, my research centers on computer science and mathematical modeling of biological processes. Do I still qualify for these opportunities, considering my need to collaborate with experts in biology to enhance the accuracy of my models?
Now, that's a really good point. I think probably my knee-jerk noun is lab, but it doesn't have to be in a lab. I mean, we're all working in these alternate places now once in a while anyway. It could be your computer terminal. It's wherever it is that you're doing your research. You have to be an independent researcher. So you might not have a wet lab, but you probably have a lab group or a group of people that you're working with. You have students, maybe postdocs, maybe techs. I don't know. It depends on the structure of where you are and the kind of work you're doing. But so it does not need to just be basic research, and it could be also clinical too, right? So to do with the mathematical modeling, absolutely, you're eligible to apply. You do need to keep the scope of the research within the NIH mission space. So as long as it's modeling something to do with human health, that's fine, because not only would we have a problem with it as NIH if there's no relevance to human health, but my guess, and Jean and Sharon will comment, my guess is that reviewers might say, where's the biology here? Or where's the human health impact here if there is none? So I don't know, Sharon or Jean, did you want to comment on that?
I think you said it perfectly. One of the things that we do ask that reviewers, we ask reviewers to recite when presenting their evaluations is, if successful, or they, in kind of plain English terms, the applicant wishes to do this, to perform this, or to identify this, or to define this. If successful, it will blank. What would it do to that area of science? What would the impact be? Would it be high impact? Would it be moderate impact? Would it be low impact? So those all go together when you're thinking about high risk and high reward.
All right. Here's a question for, I guess, Sharon and Jean. Can I submit other proposals, such as R01s, to other institutions at the same review cycle?
I can jump in, Jean. Yes, you can be submitting for the same review cycle, but if, for example, the R1 is awarded first, you would then lose your ESI status for DP2s. So you'd have to withdraw your DP2, correct, Trish? Just making sure I get that right. But you can write multiple applications on similar or the same topic. You just, at the end of the day, need to figure out if one gets funded, what are you going to do? And if the R1 gets funded first, then you have to withdraw the DP2.
Right.
Just to throw a little more at that, I completely agree, Sharon, and we have that all the time. However, the one thing that's important is you cannot have scientific overlap between those multiple applications. I know some programs allow that, but the standard NIH policy is that you cannot have scientific overlap. Doesn't mean it can't be the same area. What it means is it can't be the same exact experiment that you incorporate into a DP2 application and an R01 application, or even like an R21 application. You can't do that, but you can have them pending at the same time. And if you get an R21, that's a small grant, that would not impact your ESI status, but an R01 would.
Excellent. All right. A question about, I guess, institutional commitment. So, do I need to have a support letter from my institution to declare its commitment to me as a PI?
No, there are no letters of support allowed. So all you need is for your institution to submit the grant for you. And by that, that infers that you're an independent researcher, that they're willing to submit the grant for you.
All right. Um, all right. So, kind of jumping back to if you have submitted a concurrent R01 application as an ESI, what happens if you have the DP2 review pending, but your R01 comes back with a favorable score?
You celebrate, you get an R01, you have a party. No, yeah, I know what you're saying. You're asking whether that would break your ESI status. Yes, if you get a notice of award for an R01, you are no longer an ESI. Now, if the timing is such that that the institute is going to make the R01 in, let's say, July or August, sometimes we can work with them. And if you do not need ESI status to get that R01, very rarely we can time it so that the DP2 comes out first and then the R01. That's pretty rare though, because oftentimes the timing is just too tight. As you saw from Jean's timeline, we end up making awards for this program in, well, we know like mid-July, not quite yet, but in a few more weeks, we'll have a final list from last year. So yeah, we make the awards in August, and usually R01s are out by then. So that's very challenging to do. So, if you get an R01, I say congratulations.
All right. Can DP2 time be subsumed as part of K23 activities?
No idea. I don't know. Do you know, Becky?
You'll have to talk to your program
Yeah,
officer
yeah.
for that, to see if that's allowed.
Yeah, I don't know, and it might vary between different institutes or centers depending on where your K award is through. So check with them. And they can always reach out to me if there are questions about the DP2, because not everybody at NIH knows everything about every program. So they might not know about DP2s, but I'm happy to talk to them.
All right. What if you are not located at a university/institution? So maybe like a business? I don't.
You have to have credentials. Your wherever you're working has to have the ability to apply for NIH funding. So they have to have what is it, a SAM account?
Yeah.
They have to, and they need to do that well in advance. So if you're at a small company or a nonprofit that is eligible, make sure that they have all their registrations set up well in advance, because those things don't happen overnight. So they should be doing that now. If that person wants to email me, maybe we can talk about it. Yeah, email me and we can talk about it.
All right. And there are a couple questions asking about the differences between the NIH Director's New Innovator Award and then other efforts like NIAID's new Innovator Award and other
Yeah.
DP2 opportunities.
Yeah, there's some other DP2 opportunities out there. You're right. You have to read the differences in the funding opportunities closely. So for NIAID, NIAID, their DP2, it's there are different eligibility requirements. Obviously, you have to be within their scientific mission, right? Allergy and infectious disease. And my recollection is that you need to be in your first year of faculty. We don't have that requirement, they do. So look at that closely and make sure they're not all the same. DP2 is just a mechanism, okay? The Director's New Innovator Award is the program. We use the DP2 mechanism, but so can others. So make sure you read the funding plan closely. Those are hard to read, but you can also reach out to me or whoever the contact person is in that other funding opportunity and make sure it's a current funding opportunity. Look for when the application due dates are and when they expire because things change.
Excellent. All right. Some questions about clarification on early stage investigator status. So does it depend on whether a PI already has a tenured position?
Has nothing to do with your faculty position when you started or where you started or what you started doing. It has to do with when you completed your training. So when you completed your PhD, not your postdoc, or your clinical residency, not your MD, okay? So it's 10 years from that time point. It doesn't matter if you got a PhD and then you went and, went to, I don't know, you worked and teach across America or something for a couple of years. Those years count. And then you came back, did a PhD, and now you're in year 9. You got 1 year of ESI status. So it's all based on timing and that clock. And of course, whether or not you received a large NIH grant yet. You can get extensions. I'm going to remind everyone that there was a little pandemic a few years ago. So if that slowed you down, you should look into that if you need an extension. I don't care if your ESI timing runs out after you applied, but before we make the award, that's okay. Just make sure you get your application in before it expires. But you can Google ESI, NIH ESI extensions, and you can find all the policies online. We don't do those. I have nothing to do with them, but I understand they're fast and they're fair, so definitely reach out to them if that's an issue.
All right, and we have a bunch of questions kind of asking about multiple submissions with the DP2. So, can I submit a DP2 in August and an R01 in October that contains some amount of experimental overlap? The overall scope of the projects be different and tailored to fit the mechanisms.
Well, but if the experiments overlap, no. There cannot be scientific or experimental overlap. There could be, it could be the same area of science, but there can't be scientific overlap, no.
Okay. And then we have a question about the MIRA. So can an applicant submit a similar idea similar ideas for both the DP2 and the MIRA R35?
So again, that's no. Standard NIH policy is you cannot submit scientifically overlapping applications that would be under review at the same time. Now, the MIRA allows you to submit a MIRA and an NIGMS R01 that can overlap, but not a DP2. We follow the standard NIH policies of overlap, so no to that, sorry.
Yeah, both parties must agree, and
Yep.
we do not have that exception.
No, we just use standard NIH policy, so that's what you're going to run into for the rest of your career if you stay in this business, so yep.
All right, back to ESI. So if you're an ESI when you submit, but then you're given a larger grant like an R01 during the review, can you still receive the DP2 if you're selected for funding and assuming no overlap?
Nope, your ESI status is broken when you receive that notice of award. So again, we say congratulations. Jean or Sharon, I don't know if that application, the DP2 would still be reviewed in that case and they would get, I guess it depends on timing maybe, where that they would get reviews, but I can't make an award.
Our division of receipt and referral may take it up, and if they see that they're no longer eligible for the award, they may withdraw it. I'm not totally sure on that, but if you're no longer an ESI, this mechanism is for early stage investigators, and if you just received an R01, you're no longer an early stage investigator.
Yep.
Okay. Another question about ESI. Can parental leave extend your ESI status?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to extend ESI status and they're listed on their website that can include medical concerns, family care responsibilities, all kinds of things. And again, we don't have anything to do with that. And I don't know how long they give for anything. So
I think there's an individual at the Division of Receipt and Referral that fields these questions about eligibility.
good.
Okay. So contacting the Center for Scientific Review Division of Receipt and Referral, CSRDRR, you can submit your question there, and it'll go to an individual that's set up to specifically answer these types of questions.
Perfect.
Of
I didn't know
eligibility.
that. Thanks. Thanks, Jean.
You're welcome.
Okay, and there's that questions asking for clarification about ESI status, and how long you have to have it. So you have to have full ESI status when you submit your application. If it lapses after you submit your application, you're fine. However, you cannot receive a large, significant NIH grant during the review process, the pending process for the DP2. If you receive an R01, say, during that time, you would become ineligible. But it's not necessarily your ESI status, it's whether or not you receive a large other NIH grant.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
hopefully
you
that
should
clarifies
think
it.
about it is that there are two aspects to being an ESI, right? Within the 10 years, or if it's extended, that's fine, but within whatever that cutoff time is. And then also you cannot have received a large grant. The whole point of the ESI is to help early stage investigators get started with their research programs. So while we're fine with the 10-year clock running out sometime between August and whenever an award is made, we're not fine with you getting an R01 and then trying to get a DP2 on top of it. And it's not going to work. The DP2s will go to an individual that does not already have a large grant.
Yep. All right. Another question about eligibility. Let's see. Are you still eligible if you have been switched to a co-PI on an R01 after the review is conducted and if the original co-PI retired and you replace them?
Ooh, wow, that's complicated.
That is complicated.
I
In
think
general,
that
if you get awarded a grant and you're a co-PI from the award, then you're a PI.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
believe
we don't use the term co-PI, so it's kind of thrown us off. So
MPI, yeah.
and if you're a multi-PI
Yeah.
on the application and then in
Then
the
you're a
review
PI.
you're a PI. But if
But if you
the
get, but
grant
if
was
you inherit one
exactly, then you're fine.
this way, I believe you're fine. I
You're
think you
fine.
need to be awarded. I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
I'm
you're
pretty
you're
sure
fine.
that you should be fine if you inherit one.
Yep.
That's a good verb to use, Becky. But you would want to clear that with the program officer for that MPI grant. And then I've had this happen. In fact, one of the individuals who's getting an award this year, they thought they couldn't apply and it was listed in our system that they couldn't apply and we had to work that out before he was even able to apply and now he's getting an award. So it can happen, but usually it's, you only have like a year left on the multi-PI grant or whatever, but you work it out with that program officer first. It's not something that we can influence.
All right. So previous awardees told me they applied for their DP2 through specific institutes or RFAs related to specific topics. Has this practice ended, and are there other DP2 mechanisms?
They might be talking about the HEAL DP2. Again, DP2 is simply a mechanism. It's a mechanism that the new innovator, the NIH director's new innovator award program uses. So yes, anybody at NIH could use a DP2 for something, but it might not be the same program. So, you just make sure that you read the funding opportunity and know what you're applying to. And likely, I know HEAL is helping end addiction long term. That's what the acronym stands for. They had a DP2 for a couple years. I don't know if it's still going or not, but yeah, it's a different one, but it's great. If you get that, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of DP2
Yeah.
options out there. We're just the original.
The
Um,
OGs, yes.
Yep. All right. Someone asking about if eligibility if you're a CEO of a research firm full time.
Well, again, it's not you. It is your institution or your firm. So look in the funding opportunity and look under eligible institutions and see if it's there. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's written down clearly. So if you can find that, then you'll know. And if not, email me and we can look through it. You can also ask the people at the company. They probably know if they're eligible to submit, for example, R01s.
Yeah, you can ask them for their unique entity identifier, their
There you go.
UEI, and that's a good indicator if they're eligible or have at least signed up. I'm not quite sure about this one. If my proposed project has been partially funded or is in midway in development, can I apply for the DP2?
Well, if something's already funded, you cannot include it to request funding for it, right? You can't get the same thing funded twice. So, yeah, I mean, the other thing is that during review, if they see that it's funded, and Jean and Sharon, I'd like you to weigh in on this, but they might think it's not novel and innovative. You already have funding for it, right?
Stefan, any?
Correct. Sorry, I was muted. Yes, indeed. That will show like a overlap, and they might have, this consideration about a potential overlapping.
So on one hand, overlap is not a scoring criteria. I mean, if they see that we give kind of an alert to program staff. But the other hand, as you mentioned, Trish, is that if research is already, well, certainly if it's been funded and they've published on it, then it could potentially lack novelty, and that could be a ding for it as well. So.
All right. Let's see. If I maintain my ESI status, can I apply 2 years in a row?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And
Happens all the time.
and are there
One thing
any
about that is that you should not, if it's an iteration of the one that you did before, that's fine. It must come across as a new application. You can't talk about what the reviewer said last time or what the score you got last time to try to influence the reviewers. Oh boy, they did really, really well. They should do better this time. That's against the rules. So
Thank you, Jean. Yeah, that's important.
you shouldn't mention that it was reviewed before. All of these applications come in as a new application. So that's important.
Right, and if you do the same with an R01, that would be a different story. If you resubmit, and that's a term, that's a real word in our NIH jargon, you actually get an introduction and you get to respond to the reviews, but that is not the case for the DP2. You're applying to a new funding opportunity, brand new. Nothing carries forward. But you're welcome to apply as long as you have ESI status. Yes.
All right. Then someone's asking if it's possible to receive both an RON and a DP2 simultaneously. And I guess for that, you'd have to have the DP2 first and then receive the RON.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't. Yeah. And the other thing that happens often when we're in this situation and talking to the PI who has both that they feel like are in limbo, often the reason they're getting that or they're in a situation where they might get that R1 is because they are an ESI. So if they get the DP2 first, their ESI status is broken and their R01 score might not be good enough to be funded. So I think it's very rare that anybody gets two large grants at the same time.
Okay. All right, if we are proposing a clinical trial, does it have to be BESH, which is what is it? Basic experimental
Yeah.
studies including humans, or could it be for a novel compound?
It could be either.
All right, if your ESI status expired July 2025, are you still qualified for this submission this August?
You need to be an ESI at the time of the submission deadline.
Yep.
Yeah, the only way you could, find out if you're eligible for an extension, but you better hurry. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jean, but my information is that, the opportunity is open on July 19th, right? The due date is August 19th, maybe it's July 20th, I forget. That's when you can first apply. So if your ESI status ends July 31st and you apply before July 31st, it's fine. Yep.
I think I believe the verbiage is if you're an ESI at the time of submission.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But if your ESI ends at the end of June, no, this funding opportunity is not open until a month ahead of the due date. So, yeah.
So plan accordingly.
Yes.
All right. Can collaborators be from outside the United States? And if so, can they be compensated?
Yes and yes. We have to get foreign clearance for it if an award's to be made, but we can do that.
All right. All right. Here's a tricky one. It seems there is an inherent limitation to the degree of risk possible for human subjects research, as ICs, that's NIH institutes and centers, will not necessarily fund high-risk clinical trial research. How can one thread the needle of proposing a clinical trial that is risky enough to win the award, but can actually be funded by the institute or center?
Well, first of all, the funding would be through the OD, not through the institute or center. So it would still be funded by OD. But I understand what you mean. The element of risk is not that you would put the human subjects at risk. That's critical, I think. You've got to define what's risky about your application, and it might not work is fine for risk, but you can't risk your subject's health. Right? So anytime, if you're thinking about a clinical trial, we have a list of contacts on our website. And what you must do is click on that, figure out, and I can talk to you about it, figure out which institute or center would be the one that would administer your grant, not necessarily fund the grant, because the funds come from the Office of the Director, from the Common Fund, right? But just say it would be through NINDS, it's a neuro project. Then you would work with whoever the contact person is at NINDS to make sure you're following the criteria that are necessary for a clinical trial that would be administered by that institute, by NINDS. So and again, you can't put the human beings at risk, but the project could be risky.
All right. There are still a lot of questions, but I feel like we need to move on to another topic real quick.
We can come back to that if we
yes.
have time at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah, and I'll try to answer some things in the box as we go through things if I can split my attention. All right, so we're going to talk about questions received about the application and submission process now. All right, so even though we're not supposed to include a very detailed experimental plan, if we're including human subjects, the human subject section will end up requiring essentially a typically detailed experimental plan. Is this correct?
Yep, that's correct. We can't make an award without that for human subjects. I don't know, did you want to talk about that, Jane or Stefania or Sharon?
I think that's a tricky one. You know, we tell everybody, you know, don't make a detailed plan. And a detailed plan, it depends on how you define what a detailed plan is. I mean, if you step out an experiment and identify, you know, indicate each of these experimental steps, but you you may want to detail, you know, the rationale behind your plan and maybe indicate some of the major players within your plan. You need to convince the reviewers that you have a great idea and that you can actually get the idea done. So we've seen, you know, details in terms of describing your plan without necessarily down to microliter amounts, again, in the lab, whatever you define your lab to be. But anything else, Sharon or Stefania?
Well, I would say that the human subject protection has to be clearly explained and detailed, so to give confidence to the reviewers that it can be done safely.
Right.
Just to add, and that part is not included in the 10-page limit, so that's a separate attachment that can be elaborated on for human subjects.
And it should not influence the score, right?
It doesn't necessarily. We say that it's within the area that can influence the score, but typically it's an administrative area that details that you have your human subject area covered. Typically, when there's a problem with human subjects in like an R01 application, it's because of the aspect of the human subjects used in the approach. So so to answer your question, yes, for the most part, it does not impact the score, particularly when you're identifying administrative aspects of human subject protection or vertebrate animal protection.
All right. All right. So two questions that merge together. So if I provide a specific aims page, does it hurt my application? And then another one saying that they've seen the funded application examples that have included specific aims and wanted to know if that is okay.
Right. Well, there's a subtlety there. With something like an R01, the specific aims page is a separate upload. It's a one-page PDF, right, that you put in separately from the research strategy. So no, you cannot have a separate upload of a single page that would be specific aims that it goes along with your essay for the DP2, okay? That would be an extra page, and no, that's not allowed. Now, we tell you to avoid using the phrase or the jargon specific aim. And the reason we do that is because we're trying to help you convince the reviewers that this should not be an R01. So oftentimes what happens with reviewers is there's a switch in the hindbrain that they start to see jargon for R01s and they go, this should be an R01. So I'm joking about that. But seriously though, to avoid some of that jargon and, you know, just call them goals or projects or something like that is helpful to keep the reviewers in the mindset that this is not an R01 and that's the way they should review it.
And it's called an essay for a reason too.
Yes,
It tells
thank
the
you.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of a technicality and a jargon. I mean, no, you can't have the extra page, but if you really want to call them names, you can. There's nothing wrong with that. We're just trying to suggest that that you might think about a different approach or a different word is all.
Seems like the stronger applications tell a nice story, and the reviewers typically comment on how this was beautifully written and very easily to understand. And sometimes it's not as easy to understand when you're looking at a specific Ames page that details in bullet points what you're trying to do. But you're integrating your goals with the way that you're going to do it and the reason why it's important. And those are the things that you want to impart to the reviewer.
Perfect.
All right, along those lines, should the style of writing be noticeably different from a standard R01? For example, approach divided into introduction, design, outcomes, pitfalls.
You know, that's again, it's a personal choice, but I would tell you to avoid making it look like an R01 for the reason that you don't want to get the review that says this should be an R01. But you still do want to discuss things like alternatives and, you know, if this doesn't work, I'll do this. Potential pitfalls, maybe just don't call them that. It's completely up to you. And you will see the examples on our webpage. Some of them use some of that, but not all.
All right, and we have a few questions asking about how many applications will be funded.
Well, the funding opportunity says very clearly how much money we have that should make approximately 30 awards.
All right, and then they note that this is down from previous years. Could you please comment on the funding rate?
Right. Well, you know, everything depends on the budget, and sometimes we have more money than others. So we always know we have this much money set aside to make 30 or sometimes in the past 35 awards. On top of that, oftentimes other institutes and centers come in and they have access to this list of beautiful science that you all have submitted, and they have scores and reviews, and there's a value in that. And oftentimes they come in and recognize that some of those projects would be of benefit to their institute or center, and they decide to pay 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever. And of course we say yes, please, and we end up making more in certain years versus others. But if you went back and looked, I guarantee you that the funding opportunity said I was going to make, I don't know if it was 30 or 35 awards. So sometimes what we promise, we end up doing more, but we will always do what we promise. We cannot promise to do extra. I hope that's kind of makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Can you talk about the difference in the BioSketch personal statement versus the essay investigator qualifications?
Difference. Well, you don't want it to be repetitive. There might be a little bit of redundancy there, but I think you need to include, I mean, we have the sections right there labeled for you in the essay of your past record of creativity. So I would not write the same words twice in 2 different places. I think that might annoy reviewers. Jean, what do you think in what you've seen over the years?
I think you're right. Any comments from my colleagues?
I think the biosketch can sometimes tend to be just a pretty standard NIH biosketch, but you have your different qualifications in there. I think it's important in the essay to kind of weave a little bit why these different experiences have led me to be the person to do this type of work. So sort of spell it out, sew it together, piece it together for the reviewer so that they understand why you are the best person to do the project.
Excellent. Okay. Then there's a question asking if there are examples of successful applications.
Yes, they're on the website. If you go over on the right-hand side on the new Innovator website, there's a tab that says sample applications, and you click on that, and I think there's about 5 of them, and some of them are old. As we mentioned, the budget format will be different. But I think there's about 5 of them up there.
All right. And is it common for investigators to change institutions during the award period, and are the DP2s transferable?
So, common, what does common mean? It happens. I don't think it's the usual path, but it happens. And the DP2s can be transferred. However, the original institution, remember, these awards are not to you as an individual, they're to your institution. So that institution needs to release the award. They usually do, but they don't have to. So, it's an administrative thing. And then the program officer who is working with you from the Institute or Center, and it wouldn't be me, I'm the program officer for the applications only, not for the awards. But that program officer has to approve that it's okay to move the funds. So if you're going someplace where they don't think that the work can be done, there could be a problem. So I don't know, say you're working with non-human primates and you're going to go somewhere else and say you're not going to work with the non-human primates anymore, you're going to switch to mice. That might be a problem. So there has to be comparable resources at the new place, but it can be moved, yes.
All right. And there are questions about who to contact if they have additional questions about their proposal or to see if an idea is worth submitting.
That would be me. I will tell you that as long as it's within the NIH mission, it's fine for subject area, but you're going to have to convince the reviewers that it's novel and it's significant and there's great impact to whatever you would do in the 5 years.
All right. Let's see. How many times can I submit to the DP2?
As long as you have ESI status.
Yep.
But again, as Jean said, it's a new application each time. Do not refer to an old application. That can get your application withdrawn.
All right. How do you include collaborators in your application?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that a couple times earlier. You write about them in the essay. You cannot have a letter of support. You cannot include their bio sketch. You simply write about them in the essay. So again, it's part of that story you're weaving. You need a certain expertise. So, or they have a special machine or something, whatever it is that you need, that you're collaborating with them for, you write about it. Now, the reviewers need to appreciate that you are the person leading this project. And so you're the driving force behind the research. And I think that has to be clear. If that's not clear, there can be a problem, but it's fine with us if you have those collaborators. I don't know if anyone from CSR wants to talk about that a little more. Nope.
Yeah, absolutely. We instruct the reviewers also not to expect a detailed, experimental plan, not to expect biosketches from collaborators, not to some of the things that you may be nervous about. We tell them that it's a 10-page essay, and you're telling the story, and so with collaborators, yes, that they can expect that the expertise needed is covered one way or the other through collaborators or through themselves.
All right. This would be good for our CSR colleagues. During the process of revision, the evaluation of the proposal is more on the project or on the position of the PI. In other words, if a tenure track position of a PI is a tenure track position of a PI evaluated better. Let's see. Also, if during the process of revision I change my position and get a tenure track position, is there a way to update my application with this information?
Mm.
I could, we tell the reviewers, look at the goal of the application, evaluate the importance of the goal and the significance, if successful, how would it move the field forward? We tell them when you look at the investigator, look at what they bring to the project. It doesn't matter what their status is there. It matters what they bring to the project and their, you know, their training, their expertise, how they present their plan. So changing positions or having, we tell them that's not relevant in terms of it's all about should it be done and can it be done, and can it be done, part of it is certainly your strategy that you choose to accomplish the goals and the person driving it, what they bring to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do think it's important to note, though, that we don't accept any updates. Once the application's submitted, it's submitted. So you get a new paper that comes out, that's great, but we're not going to give that information to the reviewers. And that's a little different from an R01 review, right, Jean?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Well, a lot of really specific questions. People are asking about the success rate and also asking about how many applications we receive. We cannot release how many applications we receive. Don't ask. NIH won't release it, but we can give you a success rate. So I guess Trish, you can answer that.
Yeah, again, it depends on the year, and if you can do math, you might be able to guesstimate how many applications, but I didn't tell you that. So it's anywhere between 10 and 12% somewhere. And again, it depends on the year. We've had years where it's been higher than 12%, but that's sort of the normal range.
All right. There's also a question about, are collaborators required to have ESI status?
No. They can be anyone.
All right. Excellent. Okay, we're gonna have to move on, but once again, I'll keep going through the questions in the box. You don't need to keep resubmitting. I have it on here, but we're trying to go by topic areas as best we can, and I'll try to answer those that we don't get to answer verbally. All right.
And
So
you can email me afterwards if we don't get to it.
yes, and for people asking for Trisha's individual account, just use this new Innovator Awards at mail.nih.gov. That's her.
Get to me. Yep.
And she answers them very promptly, much more promptly than I answer my mailbox. So you'll get her. She won't neglect you, I promise.
I promise I'll answer, yes.
All right, questions about data management and sharing costs. How are they to be incorporated into the budget, and are they in the direct costs?
They are in direct costs. They are not in the indirect costs. Yes.
Yep. Okay. Is there a cap on direct costs in a given year in either segment of the award? So I guess probably asking if you have to have that 300,000 each year.
No, yeah, you could have, if you like, say for the first 2 years, you could split it up 300s, or you could do a 400, a 300, and a 200, whatever. It doesn't really matter because you're going to get 900. So that's probably more important for your internal budgeting than for us. We often see if someone needs to buy, for example, a piece of equipment that their first year might be a little bit more. So it doesn't need to be exactly 300. What I ask you for is to make sure it adds up to either 900 or 600 for the second segment. Don't have it over that. Don't have it under that.
All right. And our collaborator, is collaborator time an allowable expense?
Yes, but you don't need to put that in the budget. That would be something that we would work out. If an award is to be made, it gets worked out in the just-in-time process.
Okay. Do we need exact budgets for any consortium costs, for any work that collaborators will help with? Or does this go under the ODC's line?
No, you don't need that. We won't accept a detailed budget. So you don't need that.
All right. Looking for more budget. So how do you incorporate collaborators? We answered that. And collaborators, you can talk about them also in your research strategy essay. Are there any requirements regarding the percent of efforts for co-investigators or other personnel that are budgeted in the application?
So there's no co-investigators, there's one investigator, you, that is all. So you don't list the people, you don't have a detailed budget or budget justification, you don't talk about those people. So no, there's no required percent effort because you're not even going to talk about them, right? You're going to talk about the science and you're going to talk about the impact, significance, innovation. You don't need to talk about, that you're going to have a postdoc do whatever or a student do whatever. If it's a collaborator that brings noted expertise, that's different. Then you can talk about them. You don't really need to list their percent effort, but you need to talk about what they would bring to the project.
And a follow-up for that, like how much detail should you include since you're not allowed to have collaborators submit biosketches?
Well, enough detail that you know that they're the right person to be collaborating with, what they bring to the project, why them. You might want to, if you had collaborated with them in the past, you should make a note of that, tell the reviewers that so they know it's a genuine collaboration. Maybe talk about the fact that they're down the hall, or if they're across the country, how often do you communicate? So you want the reviewers to understand it's a real collaboration. It's not just a person's name listed there because they know how to do something. I don't know, CSR, Jean, Sharon, what do you guys think?
I mean, that's
I think
pretty
you're,
much it. You have to write enough to convince the reviewers that the collaboration is genuine, like Trish said. If there is no detail at all, then the reviewers may question whether or not it's a true collaboration. But if you publish together, if you've worked together, just say that. But again, no bio sketches, nothing in the budget to indicate percent effort. So you just have to say enough to convince reviewers.
Right. I think those are mostly the budget. So let's go on to, there's a lot of review questions. So let's get our CSR colleagues involved here on this. Is finalist, non-finalist equivalent to discussed, not discussed?
yes.
And is the level of feedback the same?
Level of feedback, obviously, if it's a discussed application, one will get the critiques. You'll get the critiques of the editors for the finalist application. If it's a not discussed application, in other words, if it's a non-finalist / not discussed, you'll get the 3 critiques of the male reviewers.
All right.
But
And
since once it goes to the panelists, they're able to rely upon the prior critiques and comments as well as the application, but then they generate their own critique, and that's what you will see as an applicant. You'll see the finalists, the editor's critique, along with the final score.
And you also see for the finalists a summary of the discussion as a resume that's incorporated in the summary statement.
As you
right.
would for an R1 or R21, it'll be the 3 critiques of the panelists as well as a summary of the discussion, what took place in the room.
Right. And will applicants receive a notification?
Wait a minute, Becky. And also, the not discussed ones do not receive a score, right? I think that would be a difference that they
That's
might.
correct. That's correct. No score. It's not discussed.
Okay. Sorry, Becky.
No, that's very good.
Will applicants be notified of the result of the first stage?
Yes, we have notified in the past when we are identified the finalists. We also notified the applicants that did not make the stage 2 review. And this is usually over. In the past, we have announced it at the beginning of February.
Okay.
But it's important to
Great.
note that we can't release summary statements for anybody until after the meeting is over. So after the meeting is over, then we release the summary statements of the discussed as well as the non-discussed. We can't release not discussed early on prior to the meeting taking place. That's important to note.
But if they know they're on the not discussed list, then they can release that idea. It's no longer under review, right? They can use that idea to submit like to an R21 or an R01 or something else,
I
right?
think that their application currently is still in consideration since the summary statement hasn't been released
Oh,
back.
okay.
So,
So not yet, no.
yeah,
Okay. But it gives them time to think about
make
what to do
plans.
next.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Let's see. Previous awardees told me that an in-person pitch to the review board was required for finalists. Based on what was discussed, I take it that this is part of the review has been removed. Is that correct?
There's a different mechanism within the high risk, high reward grouping of that is Trish.
Yeah, we do that for the Pioneer, but we
Yeah.
do not do that for New Innovator. And we used to do it for the Early Investigator Awards, but we don't do that anymore either. So no, there's no in-person pitch.
All right. None of the review criteria seem to focus on the person or the institution, just the project. Do these other commonly influential factors play a role at all in the review?
Well, that's not right. The third review criteria is the investigator, right?
Yeah.
So I think whoever wrote that maybe is thinking about the new simplified review criteria, which we're not using.
Say the question again, please.
I moved it. Let's
I'm
see.
sorry.
Oh wait, here it is. Oh wait. None of the review criteria seem to focus on the person or institution, just the project. Do these other commonly influential factors play a role at all in the review?
Yeah, that's not accurate.
Yeah, our review does require quite heavily
Yes.
focus on the qualities of the investigator.
Yeah, we don't really review the institution or the environment.
Yeah.
But definitely the PI.
Yep.
It's a huge part of it.
It is.
All right. In terms of competitiveness during the review process, is there historically a bias towards funding tenure track positions versus non-tenure track positions?
I have no idea. I've never looked at that. I
don't know
think it
either.
is the case that most applicants, but not all, have tenure track positions. And I know we have made awards to non-tenure track individuals, but I've never looked closely to look at the numbers.
We asked the reviewers to focus in on the goals of the application. Should it be done? In other words, is this important? Is it significant? If it were successful, will it advance science in a major, moderate, or low impact way? And can it be done based on the strategy and based on the person that's driving it, based on the expertise and what the applicant brings to the table there? So they are very important in that regard, but they're looked at it in the context of the project and what they bring to the project.
All right. I think this one just requires a clarification. So, are the mail-in reviewers in the exact branch of a scientific area, or are they broadly in the general project science area?
When we discuss this with members of the high risk, high reward group in general, this was meant to be to evaluate projects that can transcend a small little narrow sliver of science, that people that are in the general topic area can understand and appreciate the science going forward. So by design, we get individuals within that general topic area, but not necessarily hands-on experts within the narrow sliver of science that you're proposing. So to answer your question, it's within that general topic area that we get these reviewers where they can understand what's being proposed without having the bias one way or the other of having actually executed that exact type of science, but can appreciate it. And that's the way that you're going to want to present the science as well, so that people within this general topic area can appreciate that science.
So
Alright.
just to add a general topic area, not spot on expertise.
Okay. All right. Here's one. Let's see. So, how do you ensure that the initial reviewers understand why this application may be different from traditional RO1s? And they said that they've had experience where the reviewer comments say things like there are no pilot data, even though it's not required for this mechanism. I guess how do you ensure that the reviewers, the male reviewers and the panelists are aware of the special requirements for this particular application?
Pretty intensive reviewer training series where we take small groups of reviewers so that we can look them all in the eye and go over what is expected of them, specifically going over differences between what this application is all about and what an RO1 is all about. And the differences, these reviewers know what RO1s are. And so we contrast it against RO1s and we say how this is different and the goals of this project. So we make it abundantly clear of what, that this is a different type of application. And they were accessible if they have any questions as they're underway reviewing these applications as well. So we do our best to have an intensive reviewer training program for them.
And I think it's also important and for the applicant to let reviewers know why this is not an R1, to really talk about its merits as a DP2 and just make that clear.
Excellent point. Okay. So do people who submit the DP2 who get rejections get comments like with an RO1? And so if you polled awardees, do most awardees, oh, I guess the second question. So first one is, do you get comments similar to like what you would get from an RO1 review?
Yes, they would get the comments from the 3 male mail-in reviewers as part of their summary statement, similar to what you would get for other mechanisms.
All right. If you polled awardees, do most awardees get this on the first try, or are you expected that you'll have to resubmit with better chances of success on another try?
I've never looked at that either, but I know just from my list, because I talked to many of you, that some people get it on the first try, some people, are not discussed and move up. I had one person go from not discussed to a 10. I've also had people be close to the line and then go to not discussed. It's really important that this is a brand new application each time. So you have to look at it that way and leave your old one behind. Use the reviews, make it better, but it's brand new. It's not something that, you can submit like an A1 and improve within the same application number. So it's different. I don't know if that's helpful or not. Do you guys, have you looked at that, Jean? I
And in some ways, it's more freeing because you're not constrained by what you wrote the first time, and you have the benefit of the critiques from the prior review to be able to incorporate that and make it as you wish. So it can sort of free up and let you maybe take a completely different direction given the feedback.
Mhm.
Right, and follow up to that previous question about reviewer training, but they also want to know if we, NIH, ever review the comments from the reviewers. Yeah, and I guess just we look at those. Like, how do we
Yeah.
ensure reviewers are doing what they're supposed to?
Yes, before summary statements go out, we take a look at what is sent out. So we carefully take a look at reviewers' comments.
Okay, and there's people still asking for clarification about the first stage, so of review. So if you don't go to the second stage, when will candidates be notified? Can you just tell them again?
You'll receive your summary statements after the meeting is over. Even though your application is not discussed and will not be discussed during the meeting, it still has to go out after the meeting is over. So it'll be sometime in March or early April.
But Stefania did mention that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Stefania.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying that we in the past have notified the
Yes.
non-discussed applicant once we have the list of finalists, and this usually happen at the beginning of February. That's what happened the past few rounds.
Yeah, so you'll get notified in February if you make it about the results of that first stage. However, that doesn't mean you can submit your idea to another NIH funding opportunity. You have to wait till the summary statement is released in like March or April before you can submit that idea again. And that's NIH policy, it's not ours. Okay. Okay. All right. Trish, is there a limit on the number of proposals per PI per window or competition?
Yeah, PI can submit one DP2 application at a time.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So last year you mentioned really trying to increase the number of biobehavioral and social research awardees. Were you successful? And each year it appears there appears to be 1 to 3 at most for this type of a research award.
Well, we don't know if we're successful yet because we don't know what the awards are going to be yet this year. And I don't know if we have more applications in. Maybe Jane and Sharon, maybe you guys know that.
It's fairly consistent, maybe a slight increase, but it's fairly consistent.
All right. Is it typical to include a power analysis?
Well, it depends on, I mean, you want to justify your numbers. I don't know, in the spirit of not a non-detailed experimental plan, you might not need to include the whole power analysis, but you might include the results of one of how many animals you need and why. I did a power analysis with this and this is how many animals I need, or humans, or whatever samples that you're going to look at. But I don't know that you need to include the whole power analysis. I don't think it would fit too well within your 10 pages. You don't want to use up, 5 pages on that. It depends, but I think the results of one might be important to include.
All right. And there's still questions about ESI status, about having non-NIH grants. That doesn't apply for
Doesn't count.
ESI. We just
Yeah.
look at NIH grants. So that's all that matters. Google ESI NIH, and you'll get the full list of grants that won't take away your ESI status, as well as information on how to extend your ESI status. And yes, maternity leave would likely qualify, but we have nothing to do with that, so we can't make those decisions. So you'll have to contact the people who do oversee that process. There's a question about if part of the research was submitted as a foundation award, but still pending, can I put the same idea in the DP2 application?
Yeah, that's fine. To NIH, you cannot have two applications both to the NIH on the same exact science at the same time under review. But if it's at a foundation, that's fine. If you end up getting the foundation grant and getting the DP2 award, that would need to be worked out in the just-in-time process, and you might have to not accept one or the other. Or, if you already have the foundation grant, say it started in January while this was under review, and then in August you are to receive a DP2, you might have to turn down the rest of the foundation grant. But that would be worked out by the program officer that it helps administer your grant.
Yeah, and so federal grants, you can't, I consider it double dip, right? So you can't ask for money to do an experiment that's already being funded through another mechanism, whether or not it's through NIH. It's called double dipping, not allowed. Even if it's a foundation grant, doesn't matter, you can't do it. So a way to think about it is if you're paying for stuff that's already being paid for off another grant, can't do that.
It's not ethical. I mean, if it's your startup funding, that's different, because your startup funding does not have, specific aims or grants or experiments attached to it. That's different.
Yeah, and like salary too. Like a lot of foundation grants
Right.
will kind of do the salary. That's fine. So Jean, you mentioned CSR DRR. Can you please state what this stands for?
Division of Receipt and Referral
Yes. So
at the Center for Scientific Review. So um, they're the ones that accept your applications when they come in, and like I said, there's an individual there I know that is responsible for validating eligibility of ESIs.
yes, so you'll learn NIH is very siloed. We each have our own lanes, and we kind of just have our responsibilities. That's what we take care of. So that's Division of Receipt and Referral actually looks through the application to make sure about a lot of the eligibility. But then we have our scientific review officers who are actually doing the review process. So they're different lanes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, we still have a few questions, but we're at 4:02. Yeah. So I think for those who didn't have their questions answered satisfactorily, I will ask you to please contact us after this webinar, and we'll be happy to answer them. And especially those, I did skip some of them because they were a bit more specific. So I think it'd be better to reach out to us directly. But I want to thank you guys for joining us. And just a reminder that a recording of this webinar and the slides that we used will be posted on our website at commonfund.nih.gov/new-innovator. Give us a week or two to get those posted. We have to get them approved and then posted. If you have additional questions in the meantime, please email us at newinnovatораwards@mail.nih.gov. That's a direct line to Trish. She will answer you. But we thank you for your time and wish you the best of luck in your application.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
See you later.